and see what's up with you.
Yes, sir. We'll just take few more minutes to other people to join.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Take your time. It's all right. I'm just checking. I'm just playing around with what we have, trying to see if we have a whiteboard option. Yes, we do.
Yes, sir, there is.
And are you able to see what I'm making right now? Let's say if I say hi.
No, sir.
Okay. Just 1 second. Hmm. Now you should be able to see it.
Yes, sir, it's visible now.
Great. Now it's visible, huh? Cool. That's very good. Yeah, so looks like our audio video is all set up very well. Very good. Except,
Thank you, sir.
no problem, no problem at all. Great.
So that's it. I guess, sir. Actually, today we have very active festive called Onam. So, and
Yeah.
it's a pleasure to have you here, sir. And
Thank you.
sorry for the not enough audience because many of the people they are in festive mood, and
That's all right.
we will be posting this session on YouTube so people can
That's
find it there.
that
And
is absolutely okay.
yes, sir. So good evening, everyone. And our resource person, he's Mr. Yaqeen Siqender. He's a polymath, born and raised in Kashmir. So he's about his professional profile. So he's a psychotherapist, counseling psychologist, international author, youth activist, life coach, public speaker, and himself an entrepreneur. So it's a pleasure to have you here, sir. So we'll start the session officially.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, first and foremost, for inviting me. And it's a wonderful pleasure. It's really beautiful always to talk to young people, especially about the field of mental health, about psychology, and about what we do as a profession and how do we go ahead with it. After, let's say, for example, for instance, having a degree in psychology and how it can serve you, and what role does psychology play in today's world? And once you have a degree in psychology, what are the options that you really have once you go ahead with it? So I think there is a lot of orientation and there is a need of a lot of clarification that actually is needed in the field, because psychology is a field about which people have a lot of misinformation, and there is a lot of mystery which clouds this field. And it has its own reasons, like why that really happens. And we are here to address these issues. So my name is Yaqeen Siqender. I'm a practicing psychotherapist. I practice in Istanbul, and also I'm from Kashmir, from India. I was born and raised here. So right now I'm here, so I'm seeing clients in here in my private practice. So most of my time and most of my year is spent in Istanbul. So primarily I work as a therapist these days. And apart from that, I do programs which are relevant to peace psychology and conflict resolution. I work as a consultant, also as an executive coach for different corporate companies, where I speak about a lot of different things, including life skills, mental health, could be soft skills, could be negotiation, marketing, as well as peak performance. Like, how do we go ahead with performing to the best of our power, to the best of our potential, and how do we do that? And that has a lot of relevance in the corporate field as well. And apart from that, I'm also involved in a lot of charity work and non-profit organizations when it comes to relief distribution and humanitarian crises. And the reason why I'm telling you all this is these are certain things that you can do if you have a degree in psychology based on your interest as well. So everything is possible. The only limit is your own imagination and how far do you want to go in this field. So if we have to start with psychology as a field, it can be really confusing. And the huge reason for that is that psychology, it is a degree in liberal arts as well as in science. So it has relevance in both of the fields, which is both good and bad. Bad in the sense that it's really hard that where psychology falls exactly when it comes to sciences. It's a part of human sciences, and in a lot of faculties it's taught under the faculty of science, but also it's a liberal arts degree. Now, having said that, if one has a degree or one aspires to have a degree in psychology, let's say a bachelor's degree, does that mean somebody having a bachelor's degree in psychology can only be a psychologist? Or are there any relevant options which one can go ahead after finishing a school in psychology for? Typically I did for 4 years my bachelor's degree, could be for 3 years too, like in the UK or in some institutes in India. That's what I'm told. Now, most of the students in my university, I did bachelor's in an international university in Kuala Lumpur. We had in Malaysia students from over 120 countries. And I tell you what, most of them don't work as psychologists. Some of them went to media, some of them work for banks, some of them work in the field of recruiting, some others became teachers, while as the others, they are involved in some other fields. But a psychology degree still stays relevant. Some of them work in media and PR, for instance, because psychology degree is very full of a lot of resources, and it is a degree that opens a lot of doors for you. So after your bachelor's degree, your employer or the person who recruits you for a certain job knows the fact that you understand human behavior, as well as you have that level of assertiveness and self-awareness that ideally a psychology school or doing a bachelor's in psychology should do to you. And apart from that, you will have research skills, analytical skills, because whenever you do a bachelor's degree in psychology, you do learn data analysis, for example. And nowadays, all the industries are data-driven, be it corporate world or be it in the field of psychological research itself. So with a bachelor's degree in psychology, you can do masters in a lot of different fields, or even with a degree in psychology, you can work in a lot of different fields. So don't think that if you have a degree in psychology, you are somehow stuck because there is nothing outside of it. No, it's actually your relevant experience at the end of the day. And I would actually prefer that people study psychology to know themselves more. Since I started studying psychology, and this goes back a decade or even more, I have more self awareness and I can understand other people better because I know why people act the way they do. And prediction, you can predict parts of human behavior, and what that means is you can be a valuable asset for a lot of different organizations. And if you're a person who's very good at using R, very good at using SPSS, for instance, and you're very data driven and you understand analytics very well, I mean, there can be no limit to the career options that you're going to have. So I just wanted to start with this idea that a degree in psychology is very relevant to modern world and whatever we do. Now, the second idea or the other aspect here could be, what about if I want to continue with psychology? What if I want to become a psychologist? And then what are my options going to be? And how relevant is this degree to the modern world? And that could be one of the questions that could be asked. Now, the answer to that is psychology is not a monolith. It's not something, not all the psychologists are the same. Within the field of psychology, there are more than 50 different branches that one can specialize in. So among those 50 branches, whatever you feel inclined towards, whatever you feel is your niche, or you feel that this suits me more than the other, that's the type of the fields that one can go to. So even, before we talked about with a psychology degree, what you can do, but even within the field of psychology, let's say that you want to stay and you love helping other people, and you have this thing that you want to make a difference, and you want people to realize their potential, be more self-aware, and do better in their lives. And especially if they're living with a diagnosis, with a disability, and it makes you really happy, you feel very fulfilled to do this, and then maybe this is the right thing for you to do. Even though the profession of psychology, like I work as a psychotherapist, it does have its occupational hazards, and so does every other occupation, right? So for example, you have vicarious trauma, you have countertransference, you have things like clients talking to you their life stories, and that can affect you mentally, emotionally, as well as physically sometimes. So that is an occupational hazard. But if we look at the long run, if we look at it in the long term, it is very fulfilling. And I think that fulfillment, in my case at least, it is that keeps you going on, because you see your clients, you see people that you have talked to, you see people whose lives you have touched, they're actually doing good, they're actually doing better in their lives, and that gives you a sense of fulfillment to stay in this profession despite of all the hazards that are going to be out there. Now, pandemic has changed a lot of things, let me tell you that, because I have seen the corporate world, I have seen the academic world, and I have seen the world of psychotherapy when it comes to my own private practice. And I can tell you that the dynamics of the world have changed, and they have changed, which looks more like an enduring change, meaning to say that it's going to stay for a while. And what changes have I seen? In the corporate world, for example, people are losing their jobs, they're being laid off, and there is this concept of work from home. A lot of people are working, but they can work right from their homes. So there has been a paradigm shift in that. In the academic world, the fundings, the scholarships are lower, just like the jobs. And there is this concept of online learning, and that's how we are connected online as well. And many of us are feeling very uncomfortable. Many of us feeling very uncomfortable initially, let's say a couple of years back. But right now, we're very comfortable about it. Why? Because we got used to it. And same is for teletherapy. So for teletherapy as well, now you can connect to a therapist who is in a different part of the world, which was very unknown before. And which is why the huge organizations, let's say American Psychological Association, British Psychological Society, APAC in the Australia, EU, for instance, they did have to come up with several ethics and rules for teletherapy, for instance. So there is, in the US, there is a law called as HIPAA, which is actually a portable act for insurance, let's say. So if you are using a platform, it has to be HIPAA compliant, which means that when you do a video conferencing for with a client, that the data is not being shared with a third party, for instance. So those ethics had to come up with. And what does that mean? Pandemic has shown the world or the humanity somehow some of the hues or the colors of what human beings, how we can adapt to change. And after the pandemic, what I have seen is that people are more anxious because it is something which is unknown, right? And whatever is unknown, the natural human response to unknown is fear. And people who are already having diagnosis of different sorts of mental health problems or condition are feeling more and more anxious. So there is a huge need for therapists that are flexible. There's a huge need for therapists that can use approaches like trauma-informed care, do crisis counseling, know what psychological first aid is. So there is a huge demand for therapists, a huge. Let's say, for example, in India, um, it's a population of more than 1 billion people. And even if all the young people that I talk to, I always tell them, if all of you become therapists, still there is going to be a deficit. And that's the amount of therapy and mental health support that is actually needed. I know that laws in India are very loose when it comes to mental health practice. That's why there's a lot of malpractice, there's a lot of misinformation. But at the same time, we as psychologists, or those who aspire to have a career in psychology or psychotherapy, we need to be very specific about our ethics and how is it that we portray ourselves as therapists, especially. Now, the idea of relevance that we talked about with the psychology degree, and if you want to study psychology, it's especially very relevant. But at the same time, psychologists need more flexibility. I think, classically speaking, because of ethics, which somehow were very dogmatic ethics, that has put psychologists on a back front. I mean, there is this dilemma there, which I still see in some of the older supervisors that I had. So, for instance, use of social media. Now, all of you would agree to the fact that a lot of people, let's talk about Indian context, who practice psychotherapy, they're not even qualified psychologists. They don't even have degrees in psychology. And they will just come up and say psychology says this and psychology says that. Psychology says that if you are crying with the tear in your right eye, it shows happiness. With the left eye, it shows something else. With both eyes, it shows frustration. A psychology professor says that if you are in love or if you dream of somebody, it means this, this, and that. Where is the evidence? And you will see on social media, these posts are like, there is a boom. There are like those millions of views, and people are like, oh yeah, psychology, can you read my mind? And what else can you do? But it's not only the problem of those people. It's also the problem of qualified psychologists who took a long time to adopt and adapt to the modern technology. So while we as professionals, qualified therapists, were discussing if it's allowed or if it's ethical to have a social media profile, there are con men who just go ahead and take that space because there has been a huge void in the space of mental health. So it was taken by people who talk about themselves as coaches, as psychologists, as NLP practitioners. I don't know what else is there. A lot of different things, a lot of malpractice, misinformation. Why? Because the informed people did not take action on time. And now with the pandemic, that is changing. And I do see a lot of hope that people can actually reach to qualified therapists. So my idea here is in any sort of profession, you want to do a corporate job, you want to become a psychotherapist, you need to be very flexible. That does not mean you compromise on any of the core ethics of psychology. But at the same time, I don't find any problem in being out there and creating content which is evidence-based in order to reach out to people and tell them, you know what, you have been misinformed about psychology. Because even in therapy or when we talk about psychology, there is a lot of misinformation. And the reason for that is, why is a lot of mystery around the idea of therapy? It is because therapy takes place in closed rooms. You don't have a comparison, and you don't come out and say, you know what, these are my clients that I have treated, and look at them, how better they're doing in their life. That's not allowed to do. You cannot do that. So, and whenever you're in that closed room and whatever you're doing, the client thinks that is therapy because they don't have a precedent. They don't have an idea in the mind what therapy looks like. And that happens to a lot of my clients. When they're referred to me, I come to them and they say, like, is this what therapy is like? But my therapist used to do this, this, and that. So that's why the idea of flexibility and the idea of ethics, confidentiality, for example, is a core idea in terms of the ethics of psychotherapy, which you cannot break. So when I talked about use of social media, I mean, you put out content there, but you don't go on following your clients. You don't go on follow your patients. You don't go on like social media or even in real life for that sake. You only do professional follow-ups. You don't see their stories. You don't go ahead asking and sending them friend requests. That's not how it works. That would be the breach of ethics, because there has to be a space, there has to be boundaries. Even though psychotherapy can be very intimate, but at the same time, it is a very, very professional relationship, and professional ethics have to be, I mean, they have to be on the top when it comes to the relevance of mental health. Now, also when we talk about the idea of mental health, which is there's a lot of stigma. How our society, for instance, looks at mental health. In our society, mental health is very stigmatized. And the reason for that is, I mean, think of one generation back, our parents' generation, right? I think all of you are doing your bachelor's or master's degrees for now, for instance. Now, our parents' generation, if we talk about it, there is something called as popular culture, right? What is popular culture for us? Netflix, Amazon Prime, maybe some books and magazines. Popular culture, what we see on the TV. What was popular culture in the generation of our parents? There was the idea that there is a Doordarshan TV channel, and every week on a black and white TV, there is a movie which is shown. And then there is this guy who has this life changing situation, going through a lot of crisis. And then the guy gets mad and he's thrown into a mental asylum, as it used to be known in those days, right? And then the person is like crying, shouting, laughing. So the idea of the older generation is either a person is mentally healthy or a person is insane. There is no in between. So that's how the popular culture stigmatized mental health. क्योंकि इंसानों के दो ही टाइप्स थे, या तो आदमी पागल है या वो नॉर्मल है जैसे इंसान होते हैं. So but that idea has actually been, you know, in our generation, it's not to that extent. But at the same time, there is a lot of stigma. A lot of things in mental health, for instance, they're considered as taboos. The language that we use in our daily life is very misogynistic. It's very, I mean, it's not fair. It's not just, and that's why, and that's where the role of a therapist comes in, with the amount of psychoeducation that we are trying to give, also with clarifying the client's doubts and gaining the trust of the client at the end of the day. Because if the client doesn't trust you, the person is not going to open up to you. That's a basis of human communication. And therapy, at the end of the day, whenever we talk about therapy, what are we talking about here? We're talking about a safe space. We're talking about creating a space that is safe. And in that safe space, a person who has repressed a lot of memories, has undergone God knows what, a lot of different traumas, and they come up and they know that you're the person that they can trust, and they would seek support from you. And that's how it works. And that is the type of the safe space that we need to create. And if we cannot create it enough in our private practices or clinics, we need support groups. We need those groups where people can join in together, be it the students, be it getting together for mental health, where things are discussed and stories are told in a safe space. Because whenever there is a safe space and stories are told, it removes the guilt, it removes the shame. And in our society, a lot of taboo topics, I mean, mental health is a taboo. I know a friend of mine who was a psychiatrist and working in the UK. And whenever he used to come back and people used to ask him, like, what do you do? Oh, I'm a doctor. What's your specialization? He would say, I'm a pediatrician. I mean, the stigma is to the extent even the doctor wouldn't say that I'm a psychiatrist. Why? Because the people who say Paglon ka doctor, like the guy who treats crazy, other crazy people. So imagine that is the sort of the stigma which mental health practitioners have, which first responders have. Now, on the receiving end, then we see people who are existing in the mental health situations, right? Right now, for example, I see clients in Kashmir or some other parts of India. What happens is there's a lot of malpractice, there's overprescription of drugs, and even when clients ask the doctor or the expert, like, what is my problem? And the doctor is like, I'm the expert. You don't have to know the problem. You just have to eat the medicine that I tell you to do. So that sort of thing, it even further stigmatizes, it compounds the stigma, it compounds the pain of the person who's already undergoing a lot of mental health, undergoing a lot of stress, right? So our role as psychologists or aspiring psychologists, or even as human beings, you don't need to be a psychologist, is to make other people feel comfortable. And if your client is not comfortable, you're not getting through them. That's why in the first few sessions, when your rapport that you're developing, it's correct, it's all good, and then the client starts opening up, and the client is visiting you for, let's say they say, oh, I'm so stressed, or I'm so depressed, and then you realize, oh, it's actually child abuse. It's actually a repression of a lot of those things that happen in the childhood. And they wouldn't even know it themselves, like what is happening, because they are not the experts. We are the experts. So it's our job to tell them and inform them and to share power in therapy and tell them, you know what, this is what is happening. And when you see people doing good, you follow your ethics, you follow your professional code of conduct, and people start getting better, it is really fulfilling. So that's why the idea here is the profession of psychology is beautiful in itself. Now, after therapy, we move to the branches of psychology. And that's something else that I have seen. There is a lot of, information which is incorrect that a lot of people have. Now, thumb's rule, don't look at like a mental shortcut, a heuristic, I'll tell you. Don't look at how psychology is working in India. Maybe that's not the correct picture. Psychology is a Western science. It developed in Europe. Look at the top countries which have good psychology schools and look at their sort of ethics and how things work there. If I have to know what yoga means, what Ayurveda means, I would have to come to India and see the roots of it because it developed here. Psychology is a Western science. Look at how classification works. There can be some minor differences based on culture, based on some other things, but majority. So for example, whenever you in India, I have tried this so many times with the students. I ask them, like, what is the difference, let's say, for example, between a clinical psychologist and a counseling psychologist? And they are not able to tell me what's the difference between the two. Or who is a psychotherapist? How does somebody become a therapist, let's say? Or the idea of somebody, let's say, is doing a master's or a PhD in psychology. Can that person see clients or can see patients? So questions like these are like basic questions, and the answers are very confusing. I don't know how many of you have the same experience, but my experience, because after I took in my O and A levels, I took psychology, then I did my bachelor's. Since my bachelor's, I did it abroad. I was not in India. So this idea of who's who and who should I refer to, the psychiatrist, the psychologist, the psychotherapist, or the clinical psychologist, or the counseling one. Now, this is something which is very basic, and I would like to, generally, because you're aspiring students, and I would like to tell you some little bit of information about these things. Psychology is a basic science. Basic in the sense neuroscience is a basic science, okay? Similarly, in basic sciences, let's say you do a bachelor's in psychology, you do master's in psychology, general psychology, PhD in psychology. You can teach psychology, you're an academic. It does not mean you can see clients and patients. No, you can't, because you have an academic orientation and that's what you studied. Similarly, if you generally study neuroscience, unless it's, it is cognitive neuroscience, or it is, applied neuroscience, for instance, or applied psychology, like clinical and counseling, then you're able to see people. Many of the friends which we had, they were very good at numbers, mathematics and stuff. They went to psychometrics, who developed tests like or data analysis or big data for big companies and stuff. So similarly, when we talk about a psychiatrist is a person who has an MBBS degree. So the psychiatrist becomes a doctor, and after that they do the MD, which is their doctorate, which lasts for like 3 years in India. And they do that in psychiatry, which means this: a psychiatrist can diagnose mental health problems and can prescribe medicine. By default, a psychiatrist cannot do therapy, by default, unless they take extra supervision, and that is available abroad. I cannot speak intelligently about India. A psychiatrist is not a therapist. That is the basic rule. Now, when it comes to clinical psychology, a clinical psychologist is a person who has at least a master's degree in clinical psychology. In India, it's MPhil. because unless you have an MPhil, there is RCI, it won't recognize only a master's degree. But in majority of the parts of the world, except the UK needs a professional doctorate to be called as a clinical psychologist. Master's is the degree that you can have to be a clinical psychologist. And a clinical psychologist specializes in certain parts of therapy, and as well as diagnosing mental health disorders. While as counseling psychology is not very much inclined towards diagnosing people, but it's more inclined towards helping them with therapy in their daily lives to perform better. Now, the idea of a psychotherapist, let's say I did counseling psychology masters and I'm a therapist. What makes a person a therapist? What makes a person a therapist is that you are from the background of a clinical or a counseling background. And after that, you take intensive supervision, which can be around these 2,000 hours under a supervisor. And then you specialize into something that makes you a therapist or something. So for example, based on my research and my supervision, my field is mood disorders, which includes depression and anxiety, and trauma, PTSD or complex trauma. Those are most of the cases that I see because I was supervised in those things. Now, the idea is this, and make your mind very clear about it, that how it works. When it comes to supervision, let's say there is person A who studied clinical psychology masters, and there is person B, which is me, Yaqeen. I studied counseling psychology. And both of us in our supervision, we both go for mood disorders. So when it comes to supervision, it's not different. Oh, you're from a clinical psychology background, your supervision goes there. So, oh, you're from a counseling psychology, your supervision. No, it's the same thing. And ultimately, what clinical and counseling psychologists do in practice is absolutely the same. There is not much difference in what happens when it comes to practical value. But here, when you come, it is as if counseling psychology is different and clinical psychology is a different field. No, it's not. In the practical field, it works very closely with each other, and they are very overlapping with each other. So here the idea is that miscommunication, or the people who are even relevant people that you can ask them, and they don't have answers for these things. So that's why the point is to have supervisors which are very good. And a lot of psychology students, aspiring students, when we come to the advice part, like if I have an advice for the students, like what should it be? And after that, even if you have some questions, you can ask. So the idea that if you have a bachelor's degree in psychology, or while you're doing a bachelor's degree, should you go for an internship? And when you go for an internship, what do? You photocopy papers that they tell you to do, or they tell you to do things which have no relevance when it comes to therapy. More than an internship, look for supervision. Internships don't help unless they're supervised. Internship is like, for example, let's say you go to this office. Okay, you come to my office, and I am here working as a psychotherapist. Okay, you're my intern. Check who is the new registration, and then what's going to happen. Make phone calls to people. That is not really something which is very helpful, even though I have done those things. Now it helps in a way. But more than that, it is case analysis. It is case analysis. It means like this. The therapist comes to you with all the anonymity of the client and tells you, you know what, I have this case. The person comes up and says that, you know what, I feel ugly. Why do you feel ugly? And then you have different modalities which therapists have. So I use cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, existential psychotherapy, and strengths-based positive psychotherapy. So those are like sort of the therapies that I use. And when majority of the therapists nowadays, and when I say majority, I mean 85% or more, we use what we call as eclectic approach. And eclectic approach is like you don't only use one sort of therapy for the clients, but you use more than one in order to see what fits the client better, right? And then you discuss it one by one. Like, this is the case, this is the reason for referral, and this is what is happening. What is your opinion about it? And you'll be like, a person feels ugly because somebody told them they're ugly, or in their childhood something happened. Then you start opening it one by one, and then the supervisor tells you, no, maybe this is the case. Or still, when I have clients which are difficult, or every client is unique, right? I still have my supervisor. Then you discuss the cases, like, you know what, I'm stuck here. What should I do? And then you move ahead. So most valuable thing that you can get during your bachelor's or your master's or your doctoral level or any level, even after you are a licensed therapist. Like I have a specialist title in Turkey for practicing as a therapist. But that's not the only idea. The only idea is human beings are unique. There is nothing like one size fits all of us are very different. So that's why you would always need a supervisor who is more experienced than you in therapy. So whenever you have those problems or you're stuck, you always contact your supervisor. I have a case and this is what's been happening. What should I do next? So always emphasize whenever it comes to internships, make sure that they provide you supervision. Make sure that you see this case analysis, that you dissect different cases and then you talk about these. And even when you are taking your own clients initially, because let's say, for example, you're seeing your first client, you're going to be very nervous, you're going to be anxious, it's your first time, and then you discuss it with your supervisor, and that's your practicum, and those are your clinical hours that you put together in therapy, and that's what makes you an independent practitioner, a specialist, or a consultant later on, is these hours of practice that you put together, which are supervised, and then you send the reports to your supervisor, and then they correct you, and then they tell you. So that's why when it comes to applied psychology, like clinical or counseling psychology, or to become a therapist, there is a research component, and as well as there is a component when it comes to seeing people and seeing clients in your private practice. So I think that is one of my core advices, is get a good supervisor, somebody who knows therapy very well, and somebody who can help you and tell you that what defense mechanisms are, what sort of coping mechanisms people can use, risk factors, protective factors, assessments that you have to do, psychometric testings that you do. So a lot of different things are there. So learning is out there, and there's a lot of things to learn. But the only question is, how far are you ready to put yourself into the profession, into the field, to achieve that after hard work? As I said, if you see that, if helping other people and seeing other people do better in their lives is something that has meaning for you, if that's something which is relevant to you and something that you look forward to and something that really fulfills you, then I think really doing therapy with people is something that you should be looking into. Because you might be doing a beautiful corporate job, but if you're not fulfilled, even though you make a lot of money, then that's not the idea. The idea is that to create beautiful meaning for life, and that meaning comes through fulfilling experiences. And another advice after supervision is read a lot. One of the things that I did in my bachelor's was reading at least 8 hours a day. I mean, that's not easy. While as students were, partying, what do you do in an international environment? You go partying, you watch movies, you watch football, even though I had my fun. But I started my travels and stuff. Like I've been to 37 countries by now. I started that while I was doing my master's degree. And my bachelor's was all about, studying a lot, doing a lot of research, having a very solid foundation of what human nature really means and individual differences, and cross-cultural psychology, because I speak a lot of languages. I know Turkish fluently, I know Arabic, I speak a little bit of Bahasa Melayu because I was in Malaysia, and I know a lot of different cultures because I've traveled a lot. So all of those things, and that is one of the benefits I tell you as a therapist, is that the more life experience you have, the better you would be at therapy, because you can use those experiences which are relevant to you, and you can make use of them, and you can make a good use of them in therapy. So that's something really fulfilling for me. And so far, as I worked hard for this profession, and I worked hard when it comes to peak performance or exploring human potential, a degree in psychology and studying this field has extensively helped me in putting me where I am today. And whatever deficits were there when I was starting my career. So for example, I wanted to become a better public speaker so that I could do better therapy, reach out to people. I worked on those. I joined a debate club in my university for like 4 years. And after that, I developed proper speaking skills. Apart from that, traveled a lot, invested a lot in courses. So remember, the best investments are the ones that you make it yourself. So right now you're young, invest in online courses, get relevant supervision, and don't be afraid to spend money so far as you know that in the long term it's going to all come back to you, because you have invested in the right place, because an investment always has a return. So whenever you invest in yourself, in experiences, in traveling, in meeting people that add to your life, as well as having a network of the people which are good, which are visionary, which have potential success in the future, have your networks in place, and that's really going to help. So I think all in all, when we look at the profession of psychology, if I just have to conclude, it has been a beautiful journey. It has its ups and downs. It can be challenging. I had my own times when supervision was very difficult, because a part of becoming a therapist is to do your own therapy as well. You have to undergo self-psychotherapy with the supervisor. And there are a lot of things from your childhood. There are a lot of things from the past which come up. And a lot of people can even leave therapy because of that, because you have to be very congruent with yourself before you start seeing other people, other clients. I know that is a concept which is not a very famous in India, but generally speaking, it is how it is. It was hard. I had my own difficult days. But then when I look at the journey, has it been worth it? It has definitely been worth it. It has always been a calling, and I just listened to that calling, and I have lived my life on my own terms. I travel a lot. I do things. I follow my heart, and I do see people in my private practice, and this is what I do full time. So even though it has its occupational hazards, as we talked about, but overall, it's a very beautiful, it's a very fulfilling experience. So after even this session, if you want to reach out to me, my name is Yaqeen Siqender. You can always follow me on Instagram. That's where I'm most active in sharing content, as well as you can even email me. I can share my contact with you. And if you have anything that you want to further ask, or even if you have any questions right now, I don't know if there is a section for question answers, I'll be more than happy to answer. But I'm really, very proud. I'm really, very happy for all of you for joining and for being curious and enthusiastic to learn more about the profession of psychology. And I'm always more than happy to share about what we do in our profession, so that people tomorrow who become psychologists, they're very well informed about whatever we do. Not that tomorrow I studied psychology, but I don't really know how the field looks like or works like. So that's really beautiful that at undergrad or master's level that you're trying to figure out things, how they work. So that's something really beautiful. So it's really, really nice to interact with you all. So thank you so much for joining, whosoever joined. And I wish you good luck with your career, with your studies, as well as with your success and with the path that you have chosen. May you do a great job. So I think we have text somewhere. Like, how do you see? Oh yeah, there's a thing for, I could just see it now. So do we have some time for question answers?
Yes, sir, we do have.
That's great. That's great. So I can see here somebody asked, does psychology career give economic stability? That's a very relevant and very essential question. Why? Because you do need something that you're passionate about. If it is psychology that you're passionate about, it is what it is. And then you need something that the world needs. Does the world need a lot of therapists? Yes, it does. And does it pay your bills? I mean, you are passionate, the world needs it, but is it paying your bills? That's the third question. Because apart from being a therapist, I'm a executive coach as well. So this is what I tell young people all the time. You need all these three. You need what you're passionate about. You need what fulfills some demand of the world, some need of the world. There's a gap and you fill that, as well as your financial independence. Is psychology like that? And people often ask this question in this part of the world, that if I study psychology or blah, blah, does it have good scope? And by scope, they mean, can you make money? Now, let me ask you this question. Let's talk about any successful person in any successful field. Let's talk about Virat Kohli. He is very successful as a sportsman. Let's talk about Messi, who's a very good footballer. Let's talk about, very successful doctors, for example. Let's talk about a very successful architect or engineer, or a very good chef, or a very good in any single field. They all have one common denominator. All of them are rich. Why? Because they're best at what they do. So the scope or the economic stability, it does not only come from the field that you study, it comes from how dedicated and how good you're at it. If you are good at, I don't know, cleaning dishes, you're good at, doing hair of the people, or doing makeup of the people, or doing anything, or creating something, you're good at engineering. That is the best thing that you can do. Why? Because it's fulfilling and it's really good. I mean, talk about being a chef. Like, everybody knows Turkish Salt Bay. Like, Salt Bay worked in this field and he has been, there since he was a teenager. And now if somebody comes and says, like, if I study gastronomy or if I study being a chef, is it going to make me economically stable? I'm not sure. It depends on how good you're at it. So are there psychologists which are struggling when it comes to money? Yes, there are. So is in every other field. But I can promise you, if you're really good at what you do, you will not have a problem when it comes to money. You definitely will not struggle economically. You would not. And it also depends on your interest. Do you want to have a academic career to teach? Do you want to have a private practice? And if you're somebody like me who is more inclined towards private practice, even though I have a strong research background, which I still do, because whatever we do is based on evidence. Now, private practice is something which works on the word of mouth. Even though you might be very popular on social media, so let's say even if you have 1 million followers on Instagram and you're a therapist, that will make people come to you, right? But in 1 or 2 sessions, they will know how good you are at therapy. And when that happens, they will know if you're good or not at what you do. So what do? Therapy is a profession which mostly works by word of mouth. A client comes to me because I cannot go ahead and tell people, you know what, take this person's example with this disorder. He's well now because he took therapy with me. You cannot advertise these things. You cannot have testimonials of clients. You cannot. So what do? It's word of mouth. One person tells the other, tells the other, tells the other, and that's how it works. That's how you establish yourself in a private practice. And by the time you're very established in a private practice, there are definitely other things that you can look into. So that is something that can make you financially stable. And trust me, it is a profession that makes you financially stable, but you have to be all in. Don't be dual-minded about things. Or what if I would have done this thing? How would life be? You would never know, right? So if you go all in and you work really hard and you put all your efforts, you definitely create something good for yourself. And I hope that answers your question. So any more questions, you can just type them in the text box, in the chat box. So the chat box is here. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. So if anybody else has any questions, you can definitely ask.
So thank you so much, sir, for honoring us with your valuable time. Despite having a busy schedule, you managed to spare some time for us. That's really an honor for us. I hope
Thank you.
all the participants enjoyed this interesting session and learned a lot from this session. Now, with immense
Thank you so
pleasure,
much.
we would like to honor you with an appreciation certificate as a token of love and honor. Kindly accept it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I have a couple of questions here. Shall we answer them or we are just winding up? Oh, there is a certificate. I see.
Yes, sir. We may move to the question and answer part. I think there's some technical issues, so
No
we
problem.
shall move on to the question and
Yeah,
answer.
absolutely. Absolutely. So somebody says, yes, please.
About your certificate, it will be emailed to you.
Of course, no problem, no problem. That would be nice. That would be great. Thank you so much for that. So someone asked that, is it okay for a therapist to go for another therapist, I think, for their mental health breakdown or burnout? Absolutely. And that's why you have something called as supervision, that you go to the supervisor. Even me as a therapist, I have a couple of supervisors that we go to, and it's a paid service, by the way. You go to the supervisor and you pay them the money for like a session, but it's more like what we call as debriefing. So debriefing is more like when you have a case in which you feel very attached to the client, or you feel that the boundaries might not be respected very well, or you feel that there is a situation which is very hard, or something in the client triggers you. So for example, if the client has had child abuse and you are somebody who was abused as a child as well, so that sort of a case, and that can lead to vicarious trauma, burnout, as you talked about. So in that case, what do? That's why you always need to have a supervisor. You always need to have somebody that you can always refer to. That is that is really compulsory. Oh, I can see the certificate. Thank you so much. It's really beautiful. It's really amazing to see that. It's very good. So
Thank you so much, sir. Actually, there
thank
was some technical issue. Sorry for
no
that.
problem, no problem. It's really
No
beautiful.
problem.
It's really nice. Thank you so much for your efforts. And somebody asked that what is the major difference between an honors and a normal degree? It really depends on the institute. It also depends on the country. So an honors degree can be of the two types. So one honors degree is, for example, I did an honors degree in psychology, which means it's for 4 years instead of 3. So that is an honors degree in general. When we talk about, if you say that I did BA honors internationally, it really means that you spend a year extra. You did 4 years of a bachelor's degree. That is one meaning. Second meaning for some institutes and some countries means that even though your bachelor's was for 3 years, but an honors would mean that you really had studied one of those subjects in depth. Because in India, the concept of a major is not very popular. Because when it comes to, for example, let's say uh, honors degree, BHSC, which Bachelor's of Science, that I did in psychology for 4 years. For 4 years, you only study psychology. You study like 60 courses in psychology. You do study history, sociology, and others, but they are like in one semester. But rest of the 7 semesters, it's all about psychology. But in some institutes, you have a bachelor's degree for 3 years. But let's say you're studying 3 subjects, but one of those subjects you studied in depth, they call it honors degree. So it really depends, and that's why you have to contact with your institution. And whenever you do a master's abroad or even bachelor's, they ask for an equivalency, that if your degree and our degree are like compatible for each other. So that's the basic difference. And somebody asked, like, what are we supposed to do as UG students? Reading more. I actually gave some of the tips. I think if you were here, I talked about reading more. I also talked about finding a supervisor or finding an internship that gives you supervision, intensive when it comes to therapy. And also reading is something which is very helpful. And asking yourself this question, that trying to discover and explore yourself more. Because when I was in my undergrad degree, I was doing a lot of volunteer work. And that really helped me finding this idea that I love helping other people and I want to be a therapist. So try to experiment more. Ralph Waldo Emerson, he said that all life is an experiment. The more you do, the more you know, right? So try to volunteer, try to look for different causes, and try to find out what is it, even within the field of psychology. One would be like, maybe you're doing a bachelor's in psychology, then you're like, you know what, I'm done with it. I want to do something else. Right? That's absolutely normal, and that's absolutely okay to do that. But even though you want to continue with psychology, and it looks like something that you're really good at and something that you want to do, and then the question you want to ask yourself is, what exactly do I want to do as a psychologist? What sort of a psychology is it that I want to study at the end of the day, and what do my career prospects look like? Am I somebody who's good at analyzing data and I can be a psychometrist? Am I good at developmental psychology? Am I somebody who's going to be a behavioral analyst, occupational therapist, health psychologist, peace psychologist, counseling psychologist, clinical psychologist, ergonomic psychologist, environmental psychologist? There are so many specializations. There are so many subfields within that one field of psychology as a basic science or psychology as an applied science. So there are options are very open. There are so many, and it's still developing. It's an evolving field, which is why I love it so much as well. So you can ask yourself those questions as well, because bachelor's is a time when you will have to do your degree as well as think about what is it that you're good at and what is it that you want to do at the end of the day. So you can even have mentors, people who have studied different fields and different specializations in psychology, and they can tell you, like, what does it really look like, and how does a typical day in the life of a clinical or a counseling psychologist or a psychotherapist look like. So that could be something that you might be thinking to do that. So I hope that answers your question as well. So I think those are the questions, or those were the questions that were there. And thank you so much. And I would really like to thank every single one of you for being here and for joining us. Thank you so much. And
Thank you
it's
so
been an
much, sir, for
absolute
your valuable time and effort. It means a lot for us. Thank you.
pleasure. Please take care of yourself, and all the best to you with all your dreams and endeavors. Good luck.
Thank you. Good luck. Good night.